this is Stu Bravo. Request permission to engage enemy paratroopers and attempt to snatch a grid Papa Uniform 259er 119er. Break. Enemy is unaware of our presence at this time. Over. Solid copy. Hitman 2-3.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Ben Powers coming at you from the Commander's Voice. This is a really exciting episode we have here because our guest today is Lieutenant General retired Bruce Crawford, former commander of the 82nd Signal Battalion, and he's commanded at all levels in the Army. He's worked from the tactical to the strategic, from the operating forces to the sustaining base, and we're going to discuss his experiences in the Army and his view on where things are going as we roll into the 21st century. So, General, good morning, and thank you for joining us, sir.
No, Ben, it's truly an honor to be here with you, and thank you for doing this.
Awesome, sir. So,
Appreciate the invitation.
yes, sir. We have had the chance to talk over the past few months. We've been trying to get your schedule to free up a little bit of time. You're a very busy man, even in retirement. But as we were having those discussions, the first thing that I found very interesting, and I thought a lot of our viewers would find interesting, is a brief introduction, like where you're from, what led you to the Army, and what drove you to join the 82nd Airborne Division.
Yeah, I'm from actually born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina. Attended South Carolina State University and graduated in 1986. So, in the context of your question, so what led me to the Army was, and I'll keep it short here, but I'm a first generation college student, and after being told that by my guidance counselor that I wasn't college material, I actually got some advice from a mentor that I had in high school, who was my mechanical drawing teacher. And he reached out and actually got me into college, and that was South Carolina State. And there's a whole story behind that. We don't have the time to get into that now, but I took away two things from that. One, you never destroy a young person's dreams before they have an opportunity to realize it, because you have no idea what some of these young people are going to become. But the other thing that I took away from it was that one determined leader can make a difference in the lives of others. And so when he got me into school, he talked to me about two things. He talked to me about becoming an electrical engineer, which was beyond my wildest dreams. But he also talked to me about ROTC, and he talked to me about the fact that, listen, he had served in the military. He was a veteran. Actually, he was in the Signal Corps, which was really interesting later on in life. But he talked to me about ROTC in the context of, look, when you graduate from college, you'll have a job, and you'll have an opportunity to serve. And what I took away from that is I'd be able to help my family. And so that was the initial thing that drew me in the Army. What's a little bit more interesting, though, and it might be to the listeners, is the things that kept me in the Army. Because we had a lot of people in the Army, but what are those things that cause people to stay in the Army? I think the first thing was a sense of purpose and understanding what it means to truly be a professional and to be a part of, for the first time in my life. I mean, you play sports growing up and things of that nature, but for the first time in your life, the things that kept me in were being a part of something for the first time in my life that's greater and much, much bigger than self. And then the last but not least, I think the thing that kept me in the Army, it was the brother and sisterhood. It really was. It was the people. And I'm sure they're very similar stories that are out there from the people that you've had an opportunity to interview. But it was all about the people. And I will tell you that both in the Army and the 4 years since I've transitioned, I've met some amazingly talented people. But it's hard to duplicate the people aspects, the culture, et cetera, and those things that kept me in the Army. It's unlike anything else, as I explained to a lot of my peers now. It doesn't
Roger.
make it better, but it just makes it something different.
Tracking, sir. And you've hit on a really important topic, two important topics, actually,
Mhm.
mentorship and culture. And the
Mhm.
first one I'd like to address is mentorship. So it's inspiring to hear that you as a young person found a mentor who encouraged you to develop your potential and to
Mhm.
see what you were able to do. How did mentorship influence you post commissioning? Are there any particular mentors either in the NCO or the officer ranks that stand out to you as folks who helped you to develop as an officer and as a soldier?
Uh-huh. Well, I could tell you it took a village. I was just a hard working C student, but it really, really took a village. And I'll tell you that the mentorship actually started while I was a cadet at South Carolina State. There were two captains, believe it or not, and guess where they came from? Wait for it, the 82nd Airborne Division, who were infantrymen. One, Chris Jenkins, who retired to lieutenant colonel, and the other ended up being the ADCM in the 82nd. It was a guy by the name of Major General retired Abraham Turner. And the things that they talked to us about as ROTC cadets, first and foremost, South Carolina State University since 1951 has produced more African American, it's a historically black college, an HBCU, but it's since 1951, that little school of about 3,500 students has produced more African American generals and admirals than any other school in the country other than West Point. So the things that they talked to us about were, as cadets, were pride in self, being proud of where you came from, and also that regardless of where you came from, when you entered the Army, that you belonged. And so those were kind of pre-Army mentors, but it's very important because they set conditions for what we were going to be facing when we got in the Army. Both of them were airborne rangers, and so they talked to us about every cadet wanted to be a ranger, which is why I went to Ranger School as a second lieutenant. But also ultimately it was all about being a paratrooper. Everyone wanted to be a paratrooper, and everyone wanted to be a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division. So, but once I came into the Army, the first real mentor that I had was my battalion commander. Believe it or not, over in Cold War Europe in January of 1987. It's a guy named Colonel Retired Fred Stein. And he began to shape me as a professional. So it was no longer just a job that you were in. He was a great mentor when it came to here is what it means to be a professional in the United States Army. The most influential mentors that I had are probably a couple of people whose names you would remember, but at the very top of that list was General, then Major, because he was a major when I met him, four-star General retired Dennis Vi. The things that I took away from him, I'll tell you, they were lessons of life for life, things that I apply in my life today. And so he gave us probably the greatest gift that you could give to the people that he mentored, and that was the gift of a good example of what right looks like. Things like always doing right by people. I mean, and you never had to write any of these things down because he was the example, a living, walking, breathing example. Always doing right by people, always treating people with dignity and respect, and always doing the best in any job that you had because you never know who was watching. It's always, when you're young, you want the cool job, okay? And his big thing to us is, listen, whatever job the Army sends you to do the best that you can because you never know who's watching. And that played out over and over and over again in terms of always doing your very best. I had some other great mentors like, Lieutenant General retired James Huggins, who was the chief of staff when I was fortunate enough to be in the 82nd Airborne Division. Brigadier General retired Brian Donahue was my battalion commander after General Vi. Lieutenant General retired Marine Bob Shea, who wasn't in the Army, but when I was a lieutenant colonel working for him when he was the J6, it felt like he had been in the Army. And last but not least, Lieutenant General retired Susan Lawrence, who just a sterling example every day of perseverance. And so I had great mentors to include more non-commissioned officers that I could name, but people like A.C. Coley, people like James Jordan, non-commissioned officers, and all these guys became CSMs like Mike Bartell, who wasn't in the 82nd, but very influential to Second Lieutenant Crawford, the Warrant Officer Corps. We could stay here all day, calling the names of just amazing professionals in the Warrant Officer Corps who really, as you well know, taught second lieutenants and taught captains and majors. And that mentorship from the Warrant Officer Corps continued throughout my time from second lieutenant to three-star general.
Roger that, sir. And you're setting up the segues brilliantly because you addressed the idea that your mentors set conditions and
Mhm.
towards professionalism. And there's this
Mhm.
idea that our Army reflects the values and culture of our society, but at the same
Mhm.
time,
Mhm.
we have standards that we have to uphold in a mission we have to accomplish. So, in
Yeah.
your time in the ranks, have you seen how the Army's had to adapt to maintain standards in the face of what some would say is a changing culture?
No, absolutely. What I'll tell you is the standards remain the same in the Army throughout my 34-year career. I think the things that change was fundamentally so how do leaders align the culture and standards of the Army with the identities of the recruits that come from America? They come, the sons and daughters of Americans. And so things like, so how do we motivate and inspire troops to achieve the standards that the American people expect uh, at a time when literally the world was changing around us? I'll give you an example. Things like work-life balance. When I came in, and probably when you came in, you never questioned why. And there was really, although it was a target for us, unlike today, things like work-life balance are really, really important to the recruits that we're bringing in now. I will tell you that, and I don't have the data, but there are a lot more families who are working families. Back then, there weren't a lot of, male or female working spouses. And today, you're recruiting in an environment where both the military member and the spouse uh, want to have careers. So how do you adapt? And I won't say adapt, but how do you integrate that part of the changing culture of America, into the standards of the Army and vice versa? So those are the things, some of the things when it came to the culture that actually changed. And of course, there's the influence of technology.
Roger that, sir. Speaking of technology, so as we kind of use your career as an example, we
Uh-huh.
assess people, we set conditions for them, we mentor them towards professionalism. But now we're getting into the fact that they actually have to execute the mission and do their job. And the
Mhm.
bottom line about the Signal Corps, whether we're talking semaphore flags, whether we're talking telegraphs, whether we're talking, you know, digital pipes, is to
Mhm.
get information to commanders to make decisions. So
Mhm.
during the course of your 34-year career, how did you see the pattern of information flow change, and how did you see the demand for information from
Mhm.
commanders change over time?
Yeah, yeah. One of the big ones was you talked about information flow, and it has to do with the speed required to make decisions. What information requirements do our commanders need to be able to orient, decide, and act uh, faster than peer adversaries? And so speed of information. Another thing was the technical competence of the warfighter when it came to understanding technology evolved over time. That was a big one because in their day-to-day lives today, you've got uh, warfighters on the battlefield who have as good an understanding of technology as any IT professional who's out there. And so mobility, the need to always be connected and to have that information available at your fingertips on demand while on the move. If you can think of back in our days back in the division, most information flow other than single channel comms happen at the command posts at various places. And so mobility, speed, uh, the data consumption requirements, which is a whole nother hour-long discussion. And then there were things like the warfighter needed to be able to trust what they were seeing in the various, data consumption platforms that they had. And so therefore it had to be secure. And so, probably one of the biggest things that began to happen. So we used to have information assurance when we were back, requirements when we were back in the 82nd. But the integration of cybersecurity and the requirement for that information to be secure and for our data to be secure so that that information could be trusted was a major, almost a paradigm shift that started probably in the 2010 timeframe and has grown exponentially in our world today.
No, Roger, that's sir. So when you're talking about the 2000s times frame, for those of us who served during then, that's going to evoke a lot of memories of global war on terror or overseas contingency operations. And those had their own uh,
Mhm.
unique circumstances and demands for information. But
Mhm.
I would argue that the environment in which we could operate in allowed us to build an infrastructure that we could secure. And we may not be able to have those same luxuries as we go into uh, the 21st century, dealing with near peer competitors, dealing with multi-domain operations.
Mhm.
In your professional opinion, do you see us being a prisoner of that demand for information and the requirement to secure it? Do you think commanders are going to have to be comfortable making decisions with less information? Or do you think as signal professionals we'll be able to evolve to keep up with that demand for information while participating in large scale combat operations and multi-domain operations?
So what I'll tell you, that train left the station a long time ago. I think one of the strengths of the signal regiment, two things. One, there's still a requirement to develop leaders. And I think the current leaders, the non-commissioned officers, the warrant officers, and the officers clearly understand that. Um, but I'd say there is no going back. There's only going forward. And I think the other shift when it comes to what we'll call, I'm using air quotes here, the network, is this idea that there's a tactical network that resides on the battlefield, and then there's a strategic network that goes all the way up to, the National Command Authority. I think the big strategic shift has been this idea that, look, there's one network. All right. And I believe it's referred to today as a unified network. And there's a lot of resources and culture change and changes in TTPs that have to occur to really create this idea of a totally digital force that's seamless in terms of the information flow from what a soldier has in their hand walking around in the battlefield to those who are making more strategic decisions at corps level and above. It's no longer something that we're talking about. The good news is, based on the work of a lot of people over the last 25 years, I think it's a reality now. And you're seeing that.
That's actually a very, very interesting answer, sir. And that ties into my follow-on question of we in the 82nd Airborne Division Signal Chapter, talking to our active duty counterparts at Fort Liberty, are hearing reports that the Army is seriously examining the concept of the Division Signal Battalion and
Yeah.
considering bringing that back. So I was wondering if you could weigh in on that, what your opinion of whether it should happen, and what you may know about how it's happening.
Yeah, I think it appears that that's underway, but we got to make sure that we're asking the right questions. The questions is not whether or not we have a need for a signal battalion at the division level. If you remember, we've transitioned from 10, 15 years ago, the warfighting force on the battlefield was the division. And then during what you referred to as the global war on terrorism, for a lot of different reasons, it transitioned to the brigade. We are now back at a point where the warfighting formation on the battlefield, the lead warfighting formation on the battlefield, is again the division. So the question is not whether or not we need a signal battalion. The question is who is responsible for training, readiness, and oversight of this critical skill on the battlefield based on what we've talked about. And you've got to have a commander. At least it's preferable to have a commander, just like you do for logistics, just like you do for fire, just like you do for aviation. It's very difficult to delegate that to staff unless you give that staff officer command-like responsibilities. So I'm pretty excited about the things that I'm hearing, like you're hearing that the Army, it appears, has decided to at least pursue and lean into the establishment or the reestablishment of a commander whose role is not only to install, operate, maintain, and defend with respect to the network, but also to provide training, readiness, and oversight of those critical skills that are required to deliver what the warfighter needs on the battlefield and in other types of operations. So as long as we're focused on asking the right question, I believe what will be delivered is that commander in the division and reestablishing that. And I'm excited about it.
Roger that, sir. And my last technical slash tactical question ties into that idea of a unified signal commander, because the uh, the network now is a weapon, and it needs to be defended. It can be used for offensive operations, and the Army's established its cyber branch within the last 7 to 10 years to handle that responsibility. And that's a maneuvers, fire, and effects branch.
Mhm.
At the same time, that you have the Signal Corps, as you said, responsible for installation, operation, and maintenance of those networks.
Mhm.
Is in your opinion, is there a cyber commander on the ground the same way you would have like a Divardi commander or another supporting combat arms command that can
Mhm.
support the mission? Do you think that that could lead to friction between a signal commander and a cyber commander? Or how is the Army going to mesh those responsibilities to provide the best effects at the same time providing the information needs of the commander and defending that network?
Yeah, one of my one of my good friends who, while I was the CIO G6 of the Army, he and I got to be very close, and his name was Lieutenant General Steve Fogarty, an MI officer, but he was also the commanding general at the time of Army Cyber. And what we used to collectively say is this is not a binary decision. We have to be able to do both. All right. And so this idea that there is friction, I think we need to put that to bed and not allow that conversation to happen, because what the warfighter needs is going to be both. Whether it's an integrated function or there are two separate entities on the battlefield providing this capability, the operate piece of it and the defend, both offensive and defensive cyberspace operations. Remember, this is about leveraging the network to deliver an effect on the battlefield. And so, however that manifests itself, I'm not serving today. What we in the retired community and those who currently serve can allow this to be is friction, because it's very difficult to get anything done. There'll be compromise, just like there always is in one direction or another. But we have to remember this is about leveraging the thing you can't do without, which is the network, to deliver an effect on the battlefield.
Roger that, sir. And we all should be pulling towards that common goal of delivering that effect and decisively engaging the enemy and winning. So that makes a lot of sense to me. This kind of brings me to the end of the questions that you and I had discussed, sir. But what I want to do before we wrap up is kind of give you the last word. And if there's anything you want to say to the men and women of the 82nd Airborne Division Signal Chapter, or 82nd Airborne Division Association Signal Chapter, or anything we haven't touched upon, I would love to hear your final thoughts.
Well, yeah, the first thing I want to do is say thank you to the All-Americans because the role that they played in my development, the leaders, the esprit de corps, the culture, this idea of selfless service, uh, all of that came, and much of that, maybe not all, because some, as I said, started when I was a second lieutenant in 440th Signal Battalion with the non-commissioned officers and the warrant officers and others who molded me there and basically set conditions and gave me the tools that I needed. But much of what I did throughout my career after that was shaped by my time with the All Americans. I mean, in those roles, you think about it, you take a second lieutenant straight out of college and you put them in a position where they have the lives of others during airborne operations in their hands. There's something about that that becomes a crucible, to be quite honest with you. And I always thought if you could survive at what is now Fort Liberty, then and excel there, then you can survive and you can excel anywhere. So I just want to thank all of the past and present members of the All Americans for not only what they've done in the past, but more importantly, what they're going to do in the future. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Roger that, sir. I couldn't say that any better, and it's a perfect way to wrap up our interview. So once again, everybody, this has been Ben Powers coming at you from the Commander's Voice. Our guest today was Lieutenant General retired Bruce Crawford, former CIO G6 of the Army, and more importantly, in my opinion, former All-American. So, sir, thanks for being with us here today.
All right. Thank you, Ben.